It's finally Friday. It's Friday, Friday.
Thank God it's
All right, welcome back to the Friday Show, presented by the Match Series. I'm Scott Jagow, along with Ray Paulick. We're glad to have you with us. Ray, it's a pretty big day in Washington, D.C. for the horse racing business because the Energy and Commerce Committee of the House, one of its subcommittees, is looking at the Horse Racing Integrity Act of 2017. I feel like maybe we've been here before, sort of, kind of, deja vu all over again. Tell me what's different about this time in Washington.
This is actually the first hearing that's been conducted on this particular bill. There have been hearings in the past, and the first hearing on drugs and medication racing that I attended was in 2008. And the difference between then and now is that in 2008, the Jockey Club was aligned with other horsemen's organizations saying, we don't need you to get involved at all. We're perfectly fine. We can handle this ourselves. Let us regulate ourselves. That's the best way to do it. This time around, the Jockey Club is fully behind the Horse Racing Integrity Act of 2017, a bill that's sponsored by Andy Barr of Kentucky and Paul Tonko of New York, and has well over 100 co-sponsors in the House, none in the Senate. But the Jockey Club has decided the old system, 38 different racing commissions setting their own rules, doing their own testing contracts, doing their own enforcement, just is not working.
And what would happen would be the United States Anti-Doping Agency, not a government organization, a private organization, right, would have the umbrella oversight of medication in racing, which is a thoroughly common sense approach. I mean, if we were starting horse racing from scratch today, that is how we would do it. We would not say, let's have 38 different sets of rules and regulations. And I understand that there's been some improvement in uniformity and progress in that area, but it's still a mishmash. It still causes a lot of problems. Just ask the horsemen. Even though they seem to be against this particular bill, they're always complaining about the different sets of rules and regulations in each state. So I don't really understand why they are coming out against this. It seems like they're always afraid of some sort of oversight from outside, some of independent oversight. They want to police themselves, which just this week, we've had a story out of Pennsylvania that points out why that's a really bad idea.
Yeah, the story in Pennsylvania is one where there was in standardbred racing, there was a positive test called by the lab for a class 1 drug, the most serious kind of drug. It was reported to the commission, and the commission did nothing. The commission did nothing with it. And just a couple of years ago, the Horse Racing Commission in Pennsylvania was reorganized. It was recreated through legislation, and it specifically put horsemen's organizations in a dominant position. And to me, that's like the fox guarding the hen house, to have horsemen regulating horsemen. And we see it in other states too. Pennsylvania's not alone. So what we're going to hear on during this testimony is the Jockey Club and the Breeders' Cup are in support of this bill because they think we need to be more like the rest of the world and organize under one regulatory body for our medication control. And then the opposition will come from the HBPA, the Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, and the Association of Racing Commissioners International, which believe that the status quo is just fine the way it is.
Yeah, I think, poll people in the business and say everything's just fine in terms of this issue. I would think you're going to get an overwhelming response, no, it's not. And they also include in their defense or opposition to this the LASIX issue.
Right. Because
this bill, as it stands now, would abolish race day medication, being LASIX the only one, and we're the only country besides Canada in the world that allows this. They're saying, no, we still need this. We need this medication because it protects the horse, it keeps them healthy and happy, and it sounds nonsensical when you read it on paper that this is what they believe. When we were watching Royal Ascot this week, a glorious meet not racing on any race day medication, no Lasix going on race day, and everything seems to be pretty good. I just don't understand the stubbornness about this. I don't get it. And I know that the mainstream public doesn't understand it. They don't differentiate between, say, Lasix and cocaine. So it causes an issue there for marketing purposes and promotion of the sport. But this seems to be one of the sticking points that keeps the horsemen from backing this legislation.
It's bad optics for horse racing to say that, all of its participants, and on Belmont Day, all but one horse that raced that day were given an injection of a drug 4 hours before they raced. That's just not good optics. They'll trot out the science that says that Lasix does reduce the incidence of bleeding. It doesn't eliminate it, it reduces it. But I don't necessarily think that if you have a horse that's a bad bleeder, maybe he shouldn't be racing. Maybe the horse needs to be given some rest, or to find a second career outside of horse racing. So, the horsemen's organizations are going to say we need race day medication. I do not understand why the America and Canada cannot be like the rest of the world and have competition where Lasix is not a factor in who wins the race. And it is. Otherwise, horsemen wouldn't be giving it to horses that don't bleed. It's clearly a drug that helps a horse run better.
One of the areas that I think USADA could be really helpful for the horse racing industry is in enforcement and investigation. Because a lot of times, cheaters aren't caught through drug tests, no matter what anyone says about that. Lance Armstrong was the perfect example of somebody who passed test after test after test, and all the while he was cheating, and we didn't find that out until later. He admitted it after USADA busted him through other methods of investigation. And I think horse racing, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there are a certain group of people in this business who are cheating using things that are not easily detectable, like blood doping, and they know how to get around it because the tests don't pick up on those things. So I'm going to say that's happening and that USADA could really help ferret out the problems.
Well, you're not the only one that has those suspicions. I can tell you there are a lot of people in the industry who feel the same way. One of the things you'll hear at the hearing in opposition to the bill is, look, we test tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of horses a year, or that many tests a year, and we have a very small number of positive tests. Therefore, our game is clean. So if anybody makes the assumption that just because there are not a lot of positive drug tests, that means the game is clean, that's just absurd. Number one, these are post-race tests. Any kind of blood doping has been done in training and would not show up in post-race tests. Horse racing has a very anemic out-of-competition testing program compared to other racing jurisdictions around the world. And they have, in most jurisdictions, basically a non-existent investigatory branch with boots on the ground looking for suspicious activity. So USADA would tie all of that together, and maybe we would find some Lance Armstrongs. Now, speaking of him, it's my understanding that Lance Armstrong's name has come up in conversations with one of the leading racing companies that opposes this bill, and that's Churchill Downs. Sources I've talked to have said, and I have not gotten this confirmed from Mr. Karstanjian, but Bill Karstanjian, the CEO of Churchill Downs, has told people, allegedly, that he opposes the bill because he doesn't think USADA has been fair to Lance Armstrong. I mean, if that's true, I just give up.
What can you say? What can you say about that? I did want to point out, though, that one of the other things that I think it's important to say is that there are so many upstanding horsemen in this business, and they're the ones that get hurt by the cheating. I mean, sure. They're up against it. It's a disadvantage. They should want to shine a light on this business where light needs to be shined, and I think USADA could do that. What do you think the chances are, though, that we're actually going to get some legislation here through?
Well, as we said today, I would make it a 50-1 shot, and the reason for that is that though there are more than 100 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives, not a single person has stepped forward yet in the Senate to sponsor this bill. The Senate is run by Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, from Kentucky, from Louisville, the home of Churchill Downs. And if Churchill Downs is against this, that could probably have an influence on Mitch McConnell. So until we get someone in the Senate to support this bill, I'm afraid it's dead on arrival.
That's unfortunate news to hear. What do you think about this bill in the first place, the Horse Racing Integrity Act? Share your thoughts. We have a poll on the website, paulickreport.com, and then you can also share your thoughts in our comments section of the Friday show, which is presented by the Match Series. Taking a weekend off, but then it'll be back next weekend, and you can catch up on all the standings and the upcoming races at matchseries.com. That'll do it for this edition of the Friday show. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.